So for the first question, it says, "What was the purpose of this book?"
Um, I think the thing I took from it was just that race is an issue in more places than just the United States. Like Trevor talks about his life in South Africa and all of the things that he goes through growing up.
I would definitely agree on that. Like, I'm I recently read your one letter, and it's crazy looking at how he was light skinned, but it was like I remember when I first looked at the book, and I'm like, "Born a Crime," and I was like, "What the heck does this have to like?" I was so curious just by the title of it, and then just the thought of whites couldn't sleep with blacks, and if they did, they'd be persecuted, they'd be thrown in prison and stuff because of apartheid. Or I think I said that right. But I just thought it was crazy because like he eventually like with the school, I remember like when he went to one of the private schools or something, he had to choose his group. Like, does he want to be with the white kids or the black kids? And then also just like even when he was with his like black friends, a lot of like the different cultures when he would talk didn't they were like, "You're not one of us" and stuff. So it was just, I thought it was kind of crazy. So like I definitely would say it's like what you said with the race part of it with like just learning about it. But overall, I just thought it was crazy, especially with just the whole storyline, like the stories of it, because it kind of like it. I thought it was weird how it jumped from it would talk about like race at one point, and then it would also just talk about like his funny stories at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, he jumped a lot too in between like his childhood and
Hmm.
like when he was older, and I think sometimes it didn't make sense.
Yeah, no,
um
I agree.
yeah, it's hard to follow.
Question two is, if this book was intended to teach the reader something, did it succeed? I would
Um,
say for like the teaching aspect, like especially with like I didn't really know that much about apartheid or
mhm.
like just the aspect of it. So I feel like in that sense, it definitely taught me more about that. And then just like how that whole thing expands because it's all about race, all about rules and stuff. And then how like you look at his father, and his father didn't really care at all because all his friends, all the white people were like, "Oh, you can't be with black people and stuff," and he just didn't care at all. So I would definitely say, in my aspect, I feel like it was more so teaching on apartheid, but then also just like the whole thing with the separation and everything, and how things used to be, and then how eventually everything grew to become better, and apartheid disappeared.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's important as teachers to know like that our students might feel like they don't fit in even if they are surrounded by people who technically look like them.
Hmm.
um they could still feel like they don't fit in because of other things that set them apart, like in this case like all the different South African languages. um and they may have all looked the same, but they didn't speak the same language, so that probably, he talked about how that set him apart and how he didn't feel like he belonged to the black groups or the white groups.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So for the third question says, was there a specific passage that left a good or bad impression? Share the passage and its effect. And when I first read this, like this question, I don't have the exact passage for it or like the page number, but probably by far, especially with being in isolation during this read, I could not. I literally started crying. I was laughing so hard when he talked about the poop inside of his house. And I remember I told all my roommates, my girlfriend, my family, but I just recall he was talking about he was home with his great grandma who's blind, and he had a poop, but it was raining. He didn't want to go out to the outhouse, and so he decided to be like a dog and put newspaper on the ground and poop, and his little turd came out. And during the entire like time he was moving and making noise, and his grandma was freaking out as if someone like she didn't know if anyone was there, and he didn't want to say anything. And then eventually, like he went back to sleep because he threw his poop out in the garbage. And then his grandmother came home from work, and the great grandma was freaking out, asking if someone was there and everything because they thought there was either a rat or someone broke into the house. And the grandma thought that there was a demon in the house. And then his Trevor's mother got home, and they had to cast the demon out. So then they started running around the block, getting all the grandmothers and everything to come because a demonic figure leaves its residue behind. I just remember reading it, like the in depth it got, and then eventually, like they had their whole prayer meeting, and his grandmother thinks he has the best prayer because he's light skinned, he's younger, and just went in depth with that. So he ended up praying. I just remember his like prayer was like, "Dear God," and it was just a lot of pauses, and he was like, "Maybe this is a whole misunderstanding. Please don't strike down and kill the fool who poops because I mean he used different language than poop, but I just remember him talking about I don't want to. He said like in his head, I don't want to pray for the person who to get killed because that demon is me or something like that. I just
Yeah.
But no, I would definitely say that was probably one of my most favorite impressions from the book, and the ending with his mother, how she got shot, and like just the whole aspect of the book with the hope part of it. That that like I feel like that was also a huge thing that like centered around the book was just the aspect of hope and faith because just the thought of his mom getting shot in the head, but God saved her life and she survived. That to me opened my eyes big time. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I actually shared this part of the book in class, but it's on page 58, and it's just he's like in school and he's having a conversation with some kids, and um I guess there were black kids and white kids, and it says the black kids were fascinated. In South Africa back then, it wasn't common to find a white person or a colored person who spoke African languages.
Hmm.
During apartheid, white people were always taught that those languages were beneath them. So the fact that I speak African languages immediately endeared me to the black kids. And then it goes on and he has like a little dialogue with them, and um they're like, "How come you speak our languages?" And he's like, "Well, because I'm black,
Hmm.
like you." And they're like, "No, you're not." He's like, "Yes, I am." And then they just like thought like, "Oh, well, you are one of us," after he showed them that he could speak their language, but until that point, they wouldn't let him identify with them. And I think that's kind of like the whole issue, like we may not think if you have like always fit into somewhere, your whole life, you don't really think about not fitting in and what kids say. And especially nowadays, like kids are way more brutal than they were before. Um, just because they have like social media and a lot of other ways to like attack others.
Hmm.
But I think that kind of stuck out to me just because it really showed um, how people can be separated from groups of people.
I also like with you talking about that. I remember also like in the book how he said he basically grew up with like his grandmother, and he was never able to leave the house or go into the front yard and play on the street with the kids just because if he did and the police saw, he'd be up for like adoption or something in an orphanage because of
Hmm.
all the rules. And I'm like, I like, especially with being in isolation, I was like, that sucks. It's like the thought of not really being able to leave your own house when you're younger. And like, if you do, you
Hmm.
have to be by yourself. Like how he said going to the park with his dad or his mom, he couldn't say their names like that because they'd get in trouble and they'd have to be like socially distanced, honestly, like with what we have to do now, but to the point where it doesn't look like he's on his own. Otherwise, everyone like I thought that was crazy. Just thinking about like, especially growing up and we're getting older now with having eventually having our own families and thinking about like you have a son or a daughter and you can't walk next to them or play with them you have to be distant because of the law and because of the government. I thought that was crazy.
Hmm.
And I actually, so we're on question 4, but I didn't see this. It also said introduce the book, but our book, it's by Trevor Noah. That's his last name, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and it's about his life in South America as apartheid is going on with Nelson Mandela, and eventually how it dissipates when Nelson Mandela is released from prison and runs for, I believe it was president, because I want to say I believe they're democracy, like country, I believe. But then he eventually came to the U.S. when he was older and started writing. But for question 4, it says, did the author cover both sides of the topic fairly and thoroughly, or did the book appear to be biased? I don't think it was biased at all because it was just a story about his own life and how race affected him growing up, especially with apartheid, and how it affected his entire family, honestly, because it affected his mom in a way, even though she was a rule breaker and she didn't really care about it. But it affected his all his relationships. He didn't really have many besides like outside of his own family realm because of
Hmm.
it.
Yeah, I agree.
So for question 5, the fifth and final question, after reading the book, has your interest been uh, piqued, or I believe that's the right word. I don't know about the subject matter. If so, would you consider reading more about this topic later in the future? Uh, I would definitely say I was interested. Like this book was definitely interesting to me, but I don't really think like there's like a sound uh subject that it falls under. I mean, besides race and everything, like the biggest thing to me was the apartheid. So like I mean, maybe reading a book more so that just heavily focuses on apartheid and like every soul, like the law, all the rules that happened in South America during that time. I feel like maybe that'd be interesting, but I feel like that'd be more of like a history book more than like growing and knowing more about like someone's own life, how race affected them in some point of way. But I would definitely say I'd highly consider reading a book like this again, or at least from the same author.
Yeah, I think um it it doesn't really have like a good way to classify it, like you said, like besides it talks about apartheid the whole time and um about race. But I think it did a good job of giving us a perspective of the things that people go through racially and um, just like that racism is apparent other places. And I think it would be interesting to like read a book about how, races are perceived and just the inequalities that others are facing still, and not only like in South America and here, but just in like other countries too.
Hmm.
Because this is a different perspective than what we've known. Um, but I do think it's interesting to learn about different cultures, and um, obviously apartheid was a big part of this book. Um, so I'd be interested to see like in another book that would take place like in another part of the world, how race was affected there and if it had to do with like something big in history like this one did.
Yeah, we're out of questions, but one thing that I was thinking about is like something that really stuck out to me, just like in general about the book that I just thought of was just how everything was so divided because they're one country. I know, no matter the size of the country, a country's big. I mean, we live in the U.S., but it's just huge. But looking at South America and just seeing like how small it is compared to, it's like comparing it to like Illinois, for instance, and it's just crazy thinking that I want to say in total there's 4 or 5 different languages that were spoken. And I thought that was crazy because, like, I mean, I know it's different than the U.S. It's all it's like tribal and everything, but it's just the thought of how divided other countries are outside of the U.S. with one country speaking different languages depending on where you're at within the country. I thought that was insane. But then also just like the thought of how Trevor was able to grasp those, it's unique. But I thought that really stuck out to me was how divided South America is slash was at the time with reading this book. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's some of the things that he mentioned, like things he went through growing up, they
Hmm.
almost seem like they like it almost seems like it's just a story,
Yeah.
because it's hard to believe those things happen to somebody, and it almost like hurt me to read the book in a few places just because it was so in depth, and
Hmm.
just for somebody to really have to endure that, it's so sad.
Yeah, like I remember when the bus ride in particular where his mom threw him out and she had his baby brother in her arms because they were gonna get killed or something by the bus driver or the gang member. And it was also kind of just crazy thinking of I remember they were waiting for a bus, but it wasn't like a bus, it was like a gang area because everyone needed money because the areas they were in weren't that high, they were really low income and
Hmm.
everything like that. I remember they were waiting for their ride. I forget where they were going, but uh, they ended up hitchhiking. Some guy was nice enough to pick them up in the truck, but then that guy got beat up and I think he got killed or something because of that, and that led to them jumping onto that bus later on and everything. Like it's like Trevor's whole life was really involved and surrounded by just running in particular. Like he never stopped running, which I thought was
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, just like when him and his friend got caught. I can't remember what they were doing, but him and his friend got caught, and then they were running, and his friend got caught, but he didn't. But he knew the neighborhood so well that he got away. Um, yeah, I also thought it was really interesting how like he went to 3 different churches,
Yeah, that was
and like just to like see the different services, and I'm sure that was like so different. And I mean, he's so smart. He knows all these languages because he was inside all the time and he was reading. So I just think that just really amazes me, like especially like how adamant his mom was about him like
mhm.
reading and learning all these things, and then like going to church, and all the differences he described between the three and which one he liked the best.
You know, with that, I was like, I can definitely relate to how he felt because it's like as a kid, because my dad's a pastor, I never all I love church. I remember growing up being his age, there's sometimes I just didn't want to go. And with like when he talked about his mom's bug, I believe that's the car she drove, was some days it just wouldn't start, but she was always never wanting to give up. And he would just be like, maybe God's telling us not to go to church and everything. And she's like, that's the devil, Trevor. And she would like
Yeah.
yell at him in a different language to shut up and everything. And he would just keep pushing her buttons. And I laugh about that because I feel like that would definitely be me in his shoes. And even when I was younger, saying something like that, but it's just the thought of like his mom saying that's the devil. I'm just like, wow. But yeah, so this is our book, Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. We hope Dr. Stipp and Dr. Bray, we hope you guys enjoy, but thank you.